Unexpectedly, he kicked over the table, leaving Tolio stunned. Then he shouted loudly and charged forward, ready to strike with his fist right here and right now. He lunged at the table, hitting it hard, causing it to crack. The two girls sitting next to him were also very excited at that moment. But his eyes widened in shock. Tolio had blocked his punch. Then Tolio said, "What a shallow way of thinking." Hearing this, he was filled with rage, his wrist firmly grabbed by Tolio wanting to swing it free, but couldn't. You gan orc seller. Then Tolio twisted his wrist back, making him cry out in pain, "Leader, it's excruciating. Stop, please stop." He trembled, pleading, "You're going to break my arm," while Tolio continued to smile smugly. Seeing this, the guard rushed in, "You bastard." But Tolio quickly dodged. Then he drew his sword and rushed forward with eyes blazing with fury. The polished sword was drawn. He seemed to create a blaze that enveloped everything, causing everyone to squint and scream. Aik. A sea of fire is spreading, and they can't believe their eyes, hurriedly asking, "What the hell?" The mirror is radiating flames. Then Tolio immediately laughed triumphantly. Standing before the sea of fire, he said, "This is a gift I received from my investor. Because I am the strongest, it's only reasonable that I possess the strongest weapon, right?" Then he, like a madman, shouted loudly into the sea of fire, "Now there isn't anyone who could beat my opponent anymore. Ha 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 ha." At Eren's location, he is sitting reading and pondering over the paper in front of him. Scene change, a large ship is gently drifting on the sea, buoyed by the green waves carrying it across the water. Seagulls are flying against the sky, creating a very peaceful scene. But in contrast to that serene setting, a fierce competition is taking place on the ship's deck. Eren, unlike usual, is wearing a sleeveless shirt that reveals his strong, muscular arms. He swings the sword powerfully, with great speed forward. The one who used two swords to block the attack is Elkin Isla, whose beauty is equally matched with Eren's. Elkin smiles, quickly counterattacking towards Eren, forcing him to swiftly step back to dodge the blow. After that, he took the opportunity to stab with his sword, but unfortunately, Elkin had leaned back and avoided the blow. The two fought back and forth, witnessed by two others on the ship. Looking at their appearance and attire, it could be guessed that they were the captain and his crew member. The captain observed and remarked, "That Valva's warrior really has terrifying combat strength." The crew member could only nod with concern at the attacks from the two. They continued to express their admiration, but this time it was a subtle praise for Eren, as Governor Pendragon was able to hold his own against him. Elsewhere on the ship, a tall, muscular man with a thick beard was conversing with a group of orcs. The atmosphere seemed quite harmonious, and perhaps it was not just Eren and Elkin, but others were also in a fairly intense battle. The captain took everything into his sight, frowned, and thought, "If we add their forces to the Navy to deal with the pirates, it will definitely enhance our combat capabilities." After a long while of fighting vigorously, both Eren and Elkin were quite exhausted. The two put down their weapons, lay beside each other, leaned against the Griffon, panting, and watched the other griffins soaring through the sky with their riders. Eren, with his hair neatly tied up, leaned back against the Griffon, deep in thought. "It has been 3 months since I arrived in Luce." Images from the past flashed through his mind, papers and pictures of the captured people. He recalled what he had done, subduing pirates and dismantling their illegal operations. He had gone through all these troubles to make them lose most of their funds. Sweat trickled down his face. So why? Why hasn't Tolio shown himself yet? Suddenly he called out, "Killian!" At that moment, Killian was still fighting. Hearing the call, he could only dodge a strike and respond. "Yes." Eren continued to ask, while Elkin seemed to have fallen asleep from exhaustion. Is there still no news from those three? Scene change. The ship had just docked at an island with massive cliffs. On the deserted island, a large group of people, including humans and green-skinned pirates, gathered in front of a cave entrance, which was a meter higher than their heads. One man among them, deep in thought, rubbed his chin and assessed the situation around him. This is indeed a noteworthy gathering. The three great pirates, Siklal, Sebjilka, and our Stormy faction. All three groups of people were a bit intimidating, each displaying very serious and somewhat grumpy faces. Only John Myers remained relaxed with a slight smile. At this moment, the three people gathered into a group and spoke to each other. The one wearing a dark green scarf spoke up. "All the Southern Sea pirates have gathered." The one in the blue scarf replied, "But did you notice?" It turned out that the speaker was a girl with shoulder-length hair and a plunging neckline, looking somewhat beautiful and stylish. She was a spy from the White Dragon's Silly Brigade, and she sarcastically remarked, "You look no different from this bunch." The one wearing the yellow scarf responded, "That's a spy from the White Dragon Brigade, Gus. I don't want to hear you talk, you scoundrel." He showed his attitude. The other person was the spy Jody, wearing a dark green scarf, who frowned. "Hey, you two stop it. We are infiltrating here. Focus on the mission." They were still talking when someone approached, the sound of footsteps echoing as the soles of the shoes hit the ground with a thud. A large figure appeared. It was a man dressed like a pirate. With a large bag slung over his right shoulder and a sword in his left hand, he stood before the cave entrance, shouting down from above to the group. "Gather round, is everyone here?" The person is Tolio, followed by two green-skinned men who are also holding a large bag. Tolio's eyes turn red. He bares his sharp lower fangs and arrogantly says, "From this day onwards, I will be your new captain, although not in the capacity of the Dark Emperor, but as the Pirate King Tolio." He squints and smiles, his face waved. "Pleased to meet you." It seems that Tolio's appearance has surprised and stunned everyone. Gus stutters incoherently. He swallows the words he wanted to say. Seeing the murderous aura radiating from those bastards makes everyone feel goosebumps. Even though they have 100 things to say, they can only think in their hearts. He is the son of the Sea Dragon King. Not wanting to wait for everyone's reaction, Tolio holds the bag he is carrying in front of everyone, excitedly. To celebrate this unification, your captain has prepared a gift for you. Then he pours out the contents of the bag. It is a pile of shining gold coins. He shouts loudly, "It's all yours." Tolio and his henchmen toss all the bags of money down to the crowd below. Gold coins spilled out of the bags, floating in the air. They fell in heaps on the ground. The pirates, upon seeing the gold, brightened with excitement and quickly ran over, seemingly eager to gather as much as they could into their bags. They shouted joyfully, "Gold! It's gold!" Jody looked at the gold coins in the air, unable to believe his eyes. Could it be possible that he owned so much gold? The crowd continued to eagerly collect the coins. Jody pondered if they had so much, then a cut in their business wouldn't affect them at all. And it seemed Jody realized something. He wondered, could this stash of gold be from the Arangis family? Gus and Cilia smiled brightly, squatting by the pile of gold, happily looking at Jody and asking, "Can we take some?" The crowd, having received gold, quickly cheered in support of Tolio. Greed had turned them all into slaves. Long live Captain Tolio! Long live! Long live! Tolio reveled in the adulation, laughing and waving his hand. "It's nothing. This is just a little bit." He smirked and continued, "It's my duty, really, to provide my crew with the best life possible." He pointed at the crowd and slowly spoke, emphasizing each word. "When you have been pushed into this situation," his words made the faces of the people below him look unpleasant as they knew Tolio was referring to the new governor of Luce. Then Tolio slowly drew his sword. As the ruler of the pirates, as your king, he pulled the sword forcefully from its sheath. The sword blazed with fire, flames roaring intensely. He bared his sharp fangs and declared with an arrogant tone, "I will chop that white worm into pieces." The crowd continued to cheer for him. Long live the Pirate King! Long live! Only Jody's group showed an expression of extreme confusion. The members of the three major pirate factions, Siklau and Zagielka, appeared gloomy, as if still somewhat wary of Tolio. Suddenly, a hand was raised. "May I say a few words, Captain?" Tolio looked at him and asked, "Oh, really?" The person raising his hand was John Myers, captain of the East Gale pirate crew. Hearing Tolio call his name, he just smiled, as he always did. John said, "We know you are strong, but the real issue here is the group of Grayfin Knights led by the Knight Valvas. How are we going to deal with them?" Tolio suddenly burst into laughter. Leaving everyone puzzled, his expression turned fierce. "An eye for an eye? The saying is true, isn't it?" Then he snapped his fingers, making a snap sound. From the cave emerged a group of 3 to 4 people, each leading a Gryphon, their large legs and sharp claws resembling those of an eagle, left everyone in astonishment. The ones leading them were equipped just like knights. They stepped forward amidst the amazement of the crowd, causing them to stutter. "Valvas, knight?" The sight of the fierce griffins and their handlers created a striking scene, and the face of a handsome young man drew the attention of everyone. On the deep blue ocean, a large ship was moving slowly. The sounds of laughter and conversation echoed from the ship. 2 glasses of wine clinked together, and one person spoke. "The pirates have been appearing less frequently lately." At this moment, there were 3 people at the banquet. The man in the brown suit said, "It is all thanks to Governor Pendragon." The man with tied hair laughed, "Ha ha ha." Suddenly in the distance, a ship with a black sail appeared, accompanied by a strange sound. A loud burst of laughter rang out, "Ha ha ha ha." Everyone at the banquet began to panic, looking towards the source of the sound. The gray-haired man stammered, That is." Following his gaze, the crowd saw Valvas leading a troop of Griffins. He held a crossbow in his hand, aimed at the group on the ship. The gray-haired man shouted in fear, "Gryphon." Valvas' expression was cold and indifferent as he prepared to shoot. In an instant, a flurry of arrows was released. Each arrow struck accurately, piercing the heads of the people on the large ship. A cacophony of desperate screams erupted. Valvas, mad with rage, brandished his spear, pursuing the fleeing people. The defenseless individuals ran for their lives, screaming desperately, "Please, someone save me." As soon as he finished speaking, Valvas thrust his spear straight through them, a horrifying sight. The hunt showed no sign of stopping. The griffin continuously growled, flapping its wings in pursuit of the tiny figure struggling to escape. It snatched up the body of a man, lifting him into the air. The terrified man pleaded for mercy. "Please spare me." Of course, the monster would not spare the man. It threw him down from above without mercy. The unfortunate man fell straight into the deep sea and lost his life. Valvas, the culprit behind this scene, remained calm, his face frighteningly expressionless. Two large ships were chasing each other across the ocean. The ship with the bright yellow flag, featuring an image of a tiger playfully surrounded by two pairs of wings and crowned with a king's crown, was probably from a noble family, pursuing the pirate ship. The captain of this ship shouted angrily, "You can't escape anymore, you filthy pirates." On the ship in front, Gus, Jody, and Stala turned to look back with tense expressions. But John Myers at the helm remained calm, even smiling. He tilted his head back to enjoy the sea breeze and gently said, "Why are you so angry, really?" On the other ship, the captain turned the wheel sharply, still yelling in anger, "You miserable broke scum." Suddenly, the ship in front accelerated, speeding ahead, leaving the people on the other ship bewildered. The captain, who had been furious just moments ago, changed his expression and, bewildered, said, "But if we go at this speed through an area full of rocks like this—" He hadn't finished his sentence when the crew member on the boat observing the situation shouted in panic, "Captain!" The crew member yelled loudly in fear. "There are submerged rocks." At this moment, the boat in front was still moving normally, but the boat behind was not so lucky. It struck a submerged rock, creating a huge disturbance. The ship that hit the rock had a large hole punched in it, and seawater gradually flooded in, causing the large vessel to sink slowly into the ocean amidst the desperate cries of those on board. The pirates on the pirate ship excitedly shouted towards the sinking vessel, "Ha ha ha, serves you right, you fools." The three, Jody, Scylla, and Gus, put their arms around each other, with Gus praising, "Awesome, just awesome." Jody also couldn't help but exclaim, "I can't believe they could use such a narrow gap between the submerged rocks." The crews of two other family boats trailing behind couldn't believe their eyes as they watched their companion's ship being destroyed in the vast sea, while the pirate ship carried on cheerfully. Carta shouted to Mark Killian, "Those bastards are getting away." Mark Killian took off his outer jacket and replied to Carta, "We need to prioritize rescuing them." Killian glanced towards the pirate ship, his eyes glinting coldly as he uttered two words, "Those bastards." He looked back at the sunken ship, coldly expressing, "Damn pirates." On the pirate ship, John Myers looked ahead and said, "So this will be our island. Gather all the pirates." After that, reports appeared everywhere with content like the following. The Imperial Navy has suffered a heavy defeat against the pirates. Rising costs have negatively impacted the distribution of goods and loot, leading to serious poverty. Pendragon is falling into a state of helplessness. A hand veined and full of anger crumpled the newspaper. The silver-haired captain slammed the paper on the table in fury, cursing, "Those damn filthy pirates." Eren stood with his back to the window and softly said, "It seems." He paused for a moment as if pondering something, then his expression turned serious and continued, "We've miscalculated the situation." Eren thought of Tolio's face and said coldly, "What enables them to rise up is the money that their leader Tolio brings." Then he thought of the appearance of the Sea Dragon King Orangus and speculated, "The origin of that money is likely the conqueror of the south, the Sea Dragon King Orangus." He turned to face the captain and said, "So even if we cut off the pirates' funding from loose, it will not cause them significant damage." The captain, puzzled, replied, But surely the Sea Dragon King must also bear the burden of the agreement with them." Eren coldly caressed the sword at his hip and said, "That means Orangus is using his secret weapon and sending out the Valvas Knights." He thought of the image of the Grapha Knights and continued, "He does not see this war as a small dispute, so he has used all his forces." The captain fell into silence upon hearing this, frowning in thought. Eren tightened his grip on his sword, his veins visibly popping, and said sharply, "If you want it this way." He paused for a moment before uttering, "Then I will play along with you." His voice was so cold that it sent chills down people's spines. At that moment, Carta, Elkin, and a group of people were having a meal together. Carta suddenly exclaimed, "What is this?" Carta held up the crab shell in front of him and said loudly, "There's hardly any meat at all. This is clearly a scam." Killian whispered a reminder, "Hey, tone it down a bit." The restaurant owner sighed and said in frustration, "Recently, due to the pirates, we haven't been able to catch much fish. The people in the restaurant were discussing, of course, all because the Lewis were gradually declining." Carta glanced at the restaurant owner and helplessly said, "Sure." The man sitting at the counter holding a cup of water sighed and said, "There are no traces left of the city once known as the City of the Sea. It's all gone." As the man thought about the current lives of the people, he felt disheartened and added, "It was much better when you had Lord Segunda." Carta couldn't take it anymore and angrily shouted at the man, "Hey, shut up and listen here, you bastard." Before Karna could finish his sentence, Killian quickly interrupted. Stop, you'll only make things worse for us." At that moment, the man with black hair sitting opposite spoke up, but as a citizen. He looked at the meager meal in front of him, which only had a few shrimp, and said, "I believe a good lord is someone who can ensure the people have good food to eat." The person next to him also sighed and lamented. Indeed, it was more prosperous in the past. Elkin remained silent. He thought about the image of the weary farmers planting rice, then remembered the night he talked with Eren. Eren leaned against the railing and said to him, "As a duke and a ruler, I swear I will do what I need to do." Breaking free from his thoughts, Elkin began to speak Pendragon. But before he could finish his sentence, the crowd outside the tavern was buzzing, pointing at something in the sky. The people at the table questioned, "What is it this time?" Stepping outside, Elkin saw the crowd pointing and talking. "Someone is flying over there." The person next to him patted his shoulder and scoffed. "How could a person fly?" The crowd continued to chatter. One person asked, "So, what is that then?" Elkin looked up as well. In an instant, he was stunned, his eyes widening in disbelief. The one flying in the sky at that moment was Soldrake. Elkin finally spoke up, "Sol." With a blank stare looking up at the sky, Soldrake heard Elkin's voice and lowered his head to look at him. Soldrake flew down and landed in front of Elkin. The two faced each other without saying a word. Finally, Soldrake spoke first. "I want to meet Ray, the Gryphon Knight." On a starry night in the territory of Duke Pendragon, accompanied by the sound of gentle waves. From above, looking down through two tall towers, one could see a ship floating on the surface of the sea. At that moment, from inside the mansion, Eren ran over with a panicked expression, calling out, "Sol!" Sol, with a calm expression, was playing with a little bird on his finger, turned to look at him. Eren, looking very worried, asked, "Where have you been all this time?" Sol moved closer, pressing his face against him, and asked back with a calm expression, "Are you worried?" Eren felt a bit awkward and replied, Eren turned to the railing to avoid meeting Sol's gaze and answered, "A little, since you haven't come back for a while." Sol was silent, smiling contentedly. Soldrake moved toward the railing, standing next to Eren, lightly flapping his wings, and continued to ask, "So how is the Lobstein Prairie?" Sol was silent for a moment before answering him. "We have encountered the Black Dragon, Amahalt." As Sol spoke, she recalled the scene when she met the Black Dragon Amahalt. Eren, surprised, remembered the moment he first encountered the 6 dragons and said, "Ah, one of the 6 dragons I met at the tomb." Sol thought of the Black Dragon Amahalt and replied, "Yes, however, he mentioned that he had been aware of the existence of the ley line for a long time." Eren looked at Sol, questioning, "Ley line?" Sol calmly responded, "It is a place that is vital for our dragons, a source of magical energy. Beneath the flower bushes, green butterflies were sipping nectar. They began to flutter around the Duke, who now looked very charming. He continued to ask, "So, there's a place like that on Mount Ancona, right?" A butterfly landed on Sol's hand. She looked up at Eren and replied, "Every layer has a ley line flowing beneath it." Sol recalled the memory beneath a range of mountains, where her own lair was located with the image of a dragon statue. She answered, "That is why if a ley line is cut off, our dragon species will no longer be able to use our full power." Eren fell into deep thought for a moment. Remembering the image of her transforming into a dragon and flying away, he recalled her saying, "I will return to restore my magical power in my lair." Maintaining her form outside the Pendragon territory consumes a lot of magical power, she said calmly. Eren glanced at Sol and thought, so that's the reason. Eren asked, "So on the day we made the pact and dealt with the 6 dragons so overwhelmingly?" Sol turned her head to look at him and replied, "It's because that place is my territory, and that's just one of the reasons." Eren skeptically continued, "Back then, the Black Dragon said something about dragons and demigods, right?" The conversation still lingered with Eren's doubts that he possessed the aura of both. Sol frowned, looking down silent. Eren kept asking about the issue. Is there any connection between the Black Dragon coming to the Lobstein Plains and that? Sol showed clear signs of frustration with Eren's questions. She was silent for a moment before speaking. "My reincarnation from the past and returning to the past." Sol frowned when she heard him mention reincarnation. She recalled the words of Black Dragon Aminal. "Our dragon clan is closely monitoring the movements of that Pendragon." Eren continued, his tone growing agitated, including, as he spoke, unpleasant memories of everything that had happened to him resurfaced, starting with Tolio Baltain and the sea dragon King Oranges. Eren gradually lost his composure, his voice becoming frightening. All those whom I constantly face and all the schemes. Eren clenched his shirt collar, gritting out, "Answer me, Sol." Sol remained silent, her face clearly showing her discomfort. Eren almost shouted her name. "Sol!" Finally, she spoke his name gently, Ray. She took both his hands, looking at Eren with a determined expression. This made him feel as if he was breaking free from the web of negative emotions. She spoke softly, slowly explaining, "I still don't fully understand everything. I can't tell you yet." Eren was still a bit dazed by what had just happened, his eyes slightly moist. He remained silent. Soldrake continued to explain with a tone full of sincerity, "But I will protect you, Ray, even if it means trying to the point of death." She held his hand tightly and continued, "Our souls are bound together. You are a precious existence to me." Upon hearing this, Eren was a bit taken aback, his expression revealing his astonishment. He didn't know how to respond. Sol still held his hand tightly, gently placing her rough fingers on her hand. Eren turned his hand, grasping Sol's hand. He held her hand as he sat down on a chair and softly said, "I'm sorry, I was too agitated." Eren leaned back, closed his eyes, and began to explain, "I don't want you to feel like I'm blaming you. Let's change the topic." Sol smiled gently, looking at him. Eren continued, "For now, the issue." He said, remembering the scene of the terrifying orc pirates having to subdue the pirates invading the seas. The governor suddenly thought of the detestable face of the sea dragon King Orangus and said, "And a bitter enemy from my past life, Orangus." Just thinking about it made Eren feel a sharp pain in his head. He bent over, resting his hands on his head, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "To be honest, I'm feeling quite lost. Can't we use your power to drive them away? The power of a dragon should be more than enough." Sol looked at him seriously and replied, "It's not possible." So decisively, she extinguished all of Eren's associations. He fell silent, staring blankly at her firm rejection. His face seemed to express the words, "heartless." With a hint of frustration, he asked her reluctantly, "Didn't you just say you would protect me, no matter how hard you had to try?" Sol maintained her unwavering attitude, turning her gaze elsewhere, and replied, "If I intervene, the situation will only get worse." Eren didn't know what to say, but still had questions. Sol looked out at the calm night sea and continued, "Sea dragon Viscula." She explained, when another dragonkin enters the inland sea, it becomes extremely enraged and will launch an attack. Both of them directed their gaze to the night sea, with a bright moon overhead. A gentle breeze blew the leads towards them. Eren slowly replied, "Sea dragon, the one referred to as the guardian deity of the Orangus clan." The image of the flag representing the Orangus clan flashed in his mind. Sol explained more about Hai Long and thought about its intimidating and fierce appearance. The most unruly dragon of them all, a battle-hardened dragon. She kept her gaze fixed and resolutely continued, "And one who does not recognize me as the leader of the dragon clan." Sol's gaze returned to the night sea, and she continued, "If I have to fight it without my dragon vein on this vast ocean, I cannot guarantee victory." She turned towards Eren, looked straight at him, and said, "That is why I cannot help you right now." Eren fell silent and then spoke. "Really?" He clenched his fists, slammed them down on the table beside him, and shouted, "Damn it." The memory of the castle from his past being burned down resurfaced in his mind. The image of Baltai mocking him while grabbing his hair with a bloody face, forcing him to look up at him, and the smirk full of disdain and satisfaction from the bastard Hai Long von Orangus flashed in his mind once again. Eren lost his composure again, screaming. All of this. Sol slowly approached his trembling body. She softly called his name, Ray. It made him freeze. When he looked up, her face was right next to him. Eren jumped, stood up, knocked over the chair, and stammered, "What's going on suddenly?" Sol still looked at him seriously, saying, "Your attitude isn't like it usually is." She pointed to his territory, adding, "You're not observing what's around you." Eren wondered, looking down. Below were the houses in the city, images of homeless people and children sleeping on the streets. Sol spoke up. Luce is currently in a dire situation. Eren was startled. He recalled his own words from the past. "I want my people to be able to live comfortably." Sol continued, "You said that when you were in Sissa." Eren paused, falling into silence. He was shocked by what he was doing right now. He clenched his fist, thinking, "That's right. Right now." Sol watched Eren as he walked closer to the watering can. His thoughts continued. It's not the time to focus too much on revenge. He picked up the watering can and poured the water straight over his head. Sol was slightly surprised by his action. She looked at him, trenched, and then spoke, "Really sorry, Sol." Eren ran his hand through his wet hair, then broke into a bright smile and continued. "Thanks to you, I feel more awake now." Sol also smiled with satisfaction. The early morning sunlight shone on the yellow flowers, adding visual appeal. So a long night had passed. The two of them gazed at the city from above. Eren spoke confidently. As a duke and a ruler, there are things I must do. They both turned their gaze towards the sunrise as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the town of Luce. The sunlight shone on them, and Eren, with a determined tone, said, I will save this town. The scene before them was the shipyard in the territory of Duke Pendragon. The shipbuilders were busy with their work. The townsfolk looked on in surprise, astonished by the Duke's unpredictable actions. One person in the crowd asked, What are they doing? Another person replied, They are preparing to attack the pirates, so they are building more ships. They looked towards the shipbuilders, bustling with their work, continuing their lively discussion. One person asked, Where is the money for the ships coming from? Another guy replied, Clearly they are using the Pendragon family's private funds. A soldier from the White Dragon Legion is distributing salaries to everyone. The workers are quite surprised when they receive them. Inside are gold coins. A shipbuilder says, This is gold coins. The soldier replies, They are Pendragon coins. He continues, This is the new currency in circulation. In his hand is a gold coin depicting the White Dragon. This is a peaceful city within Pendragon territory. In his hand is a newspaper reporting on the shipbuilding activities of the Pendragon governor. The content, it's as follows. Thanks to his new policy, Governor Pendragon is gradually changing the dire situation and distribution of goods in Luce for the better. Ron reads the article with a cheerful mood. He says he is using the experience of York City to his advantage. Actually, Pendragon even, he says while handing the newspaper to Luna. She asks, What? Ron continues to talk about Eren's plan. In addition to strengthening the Navy, he is also implementing other measures to combat piracy, recruiting the poor and loose to ensure their livelihoods. It's quite a good economic policy. She suddenly realized the deeper meaning behind those actions. Ah, that is. Ron nearly smiled faintly, but his expression clearly showed pride. As he spoke, he reminisced about the past, just like what we had done with the town that we had built. Before them was the image of centaurs carrying wood to construct the city walls, by searching for homeless refugees in poverty. Then came the image of the people busily building. Luna quickly grasped the issue and asked, Using a large number of immigrants for the construction of the town, right? Ron immediately responded, mistakenly confirming Luna's thought. That is exactly what he is doing. Luna Serod was amazed at the meticulous plan. She said, I understand now. Ron picked up Pendragon's gold coin and said, and he even pays them with Pendragon coins. The diagram shows that Luce is the center of trade routes. Many merchant caravans have to pass through it. Ron said, although Luce is currently decayed and weak, it is still the economic center of the empire. Images of carts and trading ships being paid with Pendragon's gold. If he starts distributing money there, Luna seemed to realize the true purpose of the plan and replied to him. The Pendragon flow will spread throughout the empire in the blink of an eye. Ron said seriously, one arrow hitting 3 major targets. Not stopping there, he continued. However, he divided the money in half with his hands. Currently, trade in Luce is poor, so there will be a shortage of goods. Ron thought about the soldiers distributing salaries to the shipbuilders and said, at least, if we only give money to the poor, it won't change the situation. He walked to the window, gazing out at the city and said, from now on, he needs help. In front of him was the port of York. The merchant was discussing business with Luna Serod. He said, to transport goods from here to Luce, using this canal will be the fastest route. Luna asked him, what about the escorts during the transport? He turned to her and replied, no need, I've hired some mercenaries already. He continued talking about his plan. Using the Pendragon warriors for this is unnecessary, isn't it? Luna hesitated and replied, that. The merchant seemed to understand her unease and he asked sadly, you don't trust me, do you? Caught in an awkward situation, she could only remain silent in response to that question. He turned his back to her, pulled his hat down, and then made a suggestion. Then go ahead and take me hostage. The merchant moved towards the pile of goods being transported. He continued, during the transport, I will be here. If anything seems suspicious, he turned his head back, looking at Luna Serod. You can handle me in any way you want. She couldn't comprehend what he was thinking. She replied, why do you have to go this far? Under the hat that obscured nearly half of his face, he offered a faint smile. Because I owe you. He smiled with his eyes crinkled in response to Luna's question. From the port, one could see the houses and shops of the city. He turned to Luna. Is that reason enough? Placing Luna in an awkward position, she pursed her lips and remained silent. The bustling yet lively atmosphere of the port was filled with workers, carrying goods from the merchant ships that had docked. Cargo from the city of York was being unloaded quickly. The guy with shiny black hair smiled and said, the city has some life back in it now. The captain replied with enthusiasm, I never thought that the governor actually had political talent. Eren responded with an indifferent expression. Well, this is an idea that the cunning advisor suggested to me. The city sparkled at night under the bright lights. "We can only implement this policy thanks to the prosperity of your," Ron said. The captain eagerly replied, "Now it's our turn to take action." The black-haired guy, with his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, turned his gaze toward him. Ron continued, "Now we will definitely be able to deal with the pirates." Eren stood behind, watching them. Suddenly he frowned, feeling a bit uneasy in his thoughts. He thought, no matter how much we reinforce the navy. He remembered the image of Valvis knights riding griffons, still unable to cope with the attacks from above by those knights. Since they were young, they had been taught how to ride griffins into battle. The scene of children riding griffins soaring in the sky fighting against orcs. Besides Isla, the gap in experience remained significant. The threat from merchant routes, not only on land but also at sea, was being complicated by the Valvis Knights. Eren continued to think, but if we don't deal with them, we won't be able to restore Luce's trade activities as before. He thought about Pendragon Castle. If this situation continues, even Pendragon's finances will hit rock bottom. In a difficult position, the governor fell silent and thought, only we had another trump card to deal with them. In the training yard, Elkin Isla was petting the griffons. He was grooming them while they seemed to enjoy it. Suddenly, he recalled the past. The horrifying scene before him, knights riding griffins attacking civilians. Elkin grew angry at the memory of that past. He stood up abruptly, shouting, "Damn it." At some point, Eren had entered the training yard. He was stroking the griffin's head, calling out, "Isla." On an island, there was a gang taking refuge. The sound of the waves lapped rhythmically. The pirates were happily drinking and chatting with each other. A feather fell from the sky. John Myers was startled. The others were panicked when they looked up at the sky and stammered to each other. "Oh, what is that?" John Myers was delighted. He turned his eyes to the sky and said, "Ha, you really came by yourself." The governor of Luce, Eren, was riding on the back of a griffin knight standing on a rock. It was a truly surreal scene. His serious face blended with the sea salt droplets. Eren Pendragon turned around, surprised to see Isla. "Pendragon," he exclaimed. He continued, "Let me borrow a griffin." Surprised by the governor's request, Isla's eyes widened. The griffin knight landed on the island and Governor Pendragon stepped down. The pirates were in a flurry, quickly taking a fighting stance. Earlier, in the training yard of the castle, 4 griffons were circling around him and Elkin Isla. Elkin had a serious expression and replied, "No." One hand placed on his sword, the other on his chest, he continued, "But if you want to go there, then you must let me come with you." Eren furrowed his brow, saying nothing. He remained steadfast in his decision. Elkin's hand tightened around the sword at his hip, drawing it from its sheath and pushing it toward Eren's chest. In a serious tone, he said, "I will be the sword to strike down your enemies." Eren finally replied, "That's why I cannot let you come along." Elkin's eyes widened. He was truly surprised by this response. Eren took hold of the sword's hilt and continued, "If I draw my sword, they will draw their blades as well." He pushed the sword back toward Elkin. "I will go alone unarmed, so I cannot." Elkin clenched his teeth. This was something a knight like him found hard to accept. He gripped the sword tightly, trembling uncontrollably. This reminded him of his not-so-pleasant past, where battlefields were filled with corpses amid a sea of flames. A voice echoed in his mind, "A sword that does not go to battle is meaningless." The image of the Valvis Knight Brigade aiming their weapons at Elkin flashed before him. Returning to reality, Eren turned and walked away with a griffin, leaving Elkin still bowing his head there. He said, "Today, I command you. Stay here, Isla." Eren closed his eyes, revealing his discomfort at that moment. Elkin gradually accepted and respected the governor's decision. Suddenly, he spoke up. "Well, at least," he said while stroking the griffin knight, continuing, "there must be a companion for you, right?" The griffin accompanying Eren perked up at his words. Eren nearly smiled faintly, his face showing relief. After the governor left, only Elkin remained with the sea. He slammed his hand down on the railing, finally releasing the pent-up emotions. His face now looked quite frightening. Damn it. Under the moonlight, it was only Elkin and the sea. On the island, where the governor was having a meeting with the pirate crew, he said, "Captain of the Blizzard crew, John Myers." With a serious expression, he continued, "I want to talk to you." John Myers sat on a high rock, looking down at Eren standing below. One of his subordinates placed a hand on John's shoulder and said, "Before that, new governor, you certainly had a tough time getting here." He brought the mug of beer to Eren's face and said, "Why not take a drink first?" Out of politeness, Eren reached out to accept it, but not letting Eren have it easily, he violently splashed the beer into his face, causing beer to fly everywhere. The pirates around erupted in laughter. One of them asked, "How does it taste?" "It's pirate beer." Contrary to what the pirates thought, Eren's next action left them stunned. Beer droplets still remained on his face, but Eren was not angry. His expression remained serious as before. His actions made the pirates who were laughing suddenly panic. Eren slowly walked toward the leader. Furious at being ignored, two pirates gritted their teeth while watching Eren. Unable to hold back any longer, the leader swung his club into Eren's face, shouting, "Say something, you little bastard." In the midst of the cheering crowd, it seemed that only 3 people recognized the seriousness of the situation. Jody stammered, "It's over." Blood had fallen, soaking the cloak. The governor's cold, expressionless face did not speak, but it made anyone who looked at it shudder. The 2 pirates who were once arrogant were now a bit scared. Their faces gradually changed color. Eren ignored those nuisances and continued toward the leader. He said, "Captain John Myers." Eren furrowed his brow, his expression still determined. "I want to talk to you." John Myers did not respond immediately. He continued to observe Eren, not in a hurry to react. His subordinates were angry at Eren's words, drawing their swords and rushing toward him, shouting, "Mother." Finally, the captain spoke up, waving his hand to signal his men to stop. He ordered, "Everyone stop." He stood on the cliff, looking straight at Governor Pendragon, not in a hurry to reply. The subordinates could not understand John Myers' actions, stammering, "Captain." He gestured for Eren to follow him and said, "Good job, new governor." They walked toward John Myers' ship. Turning to look at Eren, John Myers pointed at the large ship moored in the sea and said, "Now let's talk." In the ship's cabin, at a table covered with nautical charts, the 2 of them were discussing matters. Each of them had 2 large bags containing the new Pendragon currency. John Myers stared intently at the gold coin in his hand. Governor Pendragon was explaining about the new currency and his future plans. He listened carefully, his eyes fixed on Eren. After hearing him present his plans, John Myers smiled defiantly and asked, "Do you understand your position to dare to say such things?" Eren replied seriously, "I am only doing what is best for everyone." He rested his chin on his hand, appearing hesitant about the governor's plans. At the long table, at both ends were influential leaders. John Myers replied with a slight smile, You truly are an interesting man, new governor." In the stillness of the late night, the boat was drifting on the vast sea. A successful exchange had taken place. Returning to the mansion in Luce, a hard slap echoed against the table. The captain, furious, shouted, "Are you insane, governor?" He was angry, his eyes wide, the veins on his face standing out. "Are you cooperating with filthy pirates like them?" Eren, with a serious demeanor, replied, "To overcome the current situation, they are the missing piece we need." He continued, "In order to restore Luce, we have tried many ways." The image of the port appeared in his mind. He affirmed once again, "Valvis is the threat to the economy. But as long as the Valvis Knights are still here, trade in Luce will never recover. They are gradually wearing us down." Placing his hand on the table, where the golden Pendragon coins were set, Eren remained resolute despite the captain's opposition. He continued, "Therefore, we need to engage in a decisive battle as soon as possible." The captain responded, "So that's why you did it, for the sake of this plan." The shining gold coins sparkled on the table. Eren continued, "I have doubled the amount of coins that Tolio Orange has provided, replacing them with these coins." Eren turned his back to the captain and said, "Captain John Myers has seen through our shipbuilding development plan here by distributing those gold coins." John looked at the coins and recognized the value they would bring in the future. Those coins will soon hold immense value and dominate the entire empire. Eren highly values him. Someone like him has a far-reaching vision. He reaffirmed to the captain, he is a perceptive man. In the face of such reasoning, the captain could no longer oppose the governor. He fell silent. Eren looked towards the window and continued, "And in the event that we win," before him lay the vast sea. He continued, "The trading rights to these waters will be granted to him." Hearing about the transfer of control over the waters, the captain seemed to go insane. He shouted, "I do not agree." Unable to ignore the new governor's decision any longer, the captain yelled, "Those people have bared their fangs against the empire and against the emperor himself. The anger within me is rising strongly. What about our honor, the honor of the Imperial Navy? What will become of our honor?" Outside, a lightning bolt struck, thunder roaring. Eren's face darkened. He now resembled a true villain. He replied in a heavy voice, "Honor? Can it save us?" The captain seemed to be struck dumb, realizing that the responsibility Eren was shouldering was truly immense. The governor before him, who was no longer intact, endured the humiliation solely for the sake of his citizens. "I fight only to secure a prosperous life for my citizens." Eren's face was now filled with determination and seriousness. To achieve this, we must make sacrifices. In response to the arguments that Eren presented, the captain remained silent. The person before him was now the new governor, the body full of wounds and a blood-stained outfit. Unable to resist and having no better plan than his, the captain had calmed down somewhat, gradually accepting the reality. He turned away and walked toward the door, gently replying, "I understand." His hand clenched tightly, trembling, suppressing his emotions. In the room, only Eren remained. He watched the raindrops pouring down. What you want here is a strong shoulder bearing thousands of lives, Tolio Arangis. In a certain sea, 6 people were hanging suspended on a pirate ship. Opposite them was a rock where an orc was holding a bow, aiming to shoot. Tolio stood beside, hands clasped behind his back to observe, while about 10 villagers behind him cheered. An arrow was shot, striking the woman in the left shoulder. She screamed in pain, could only tilt her head back and cry, knowing she would surely die. The bound people around looked on in horror. Tolio laughed with joy, tears streaming down his face, and said to the orc, "Ha ha, you're really stupid. You have to shoot at their vital point." The orc, angry, growled, "Shut up. There's nothing funny about this. Just kill her already. Isn't that quicker?" Then Tolio snatched the bow and arrow from the orc, aimed at the woman, and said, "Watch and learn." He shot the arrow, piercing straight into the woman's heart. She cried out in pain and died instantly. The orc witnessed this and praised him. Right in the heart. Tolio replied smugly, "See." The man beside them, seeing this, shouted in threat, "Do you think everything will end this easily? I am of the noble lineage of the Empire." He was about to say the name of his lineage, Emp, but before he could finish, an arrow struck him in the eye. Tolio rested the crossbow on his shoulder and said with satisfaction, "Next is the eye." The surrounding orcs cheered with joy. Tolio turned his back and spoke to the people hanging there in a mocking tone. "No need to worry, you pig. Soon you will meet your old emperor down there." He laughed, glancing back with a menacing look, then continued, "I assure you, I will help you reunite." The few survivors hanging on the ship trembled in fear. The Knight Valvas was standing on the hilltop tending to her familiar. Tolio called out, "Hey, Knight Valvas." Tolio challenged, "Do you want to duel me? Let's see who is better." Tolio pointed at the man who had just been shot in the eye and said, "Start with that guy first." Knight Valvas waved her hand, indicating Tolio to hand her the crossbow. Tolio threw it up. She watched it fly high and caught it with one hand. Then she fired a shot from behind without aiming. The arrow struck straight into the man's other eye. Tolio and the orcs stared in fear. Tolio laughed and praised. Impressive. A fearful subordinate beside him called out, "Leader." The subordinate clasped his hands together, sweating, and timidly said, "There's something. A ship is transporting a large amount of gold out of Luce." 2 orcs were delighted to hear this and said, "A big catch, chief." Tolio hesitated and asked, "Are they the new Pendragon coins?" The subordinate stammered in response, "Yes." Tolio thought about the gold coin featuring a dragon and said, "I guess he intends to distribute a large quantity of those coins in the south and enhance his influence. If that happens, even your father will be affected." The subordinate replied, "That's right." Tolio stroked his chin, deep in thought. He considered the trouble at that time, that is, this person. He thought of a man in a yellow suit, the king of the south, Karl Mandy. He recalled the flag depicting a dragon and continued, "Right now, he is working under Arangis and supporting us with his money. After all, everything is about money." Tolio kept his head down, stroking his chin in contemplation. So what if those coins become dominant and he betrays us? Suddenly, Tolio smiled, his face bright. This is the perfect opportunity to show filial piety. He rejoiced and shouted to his subordinates, "Let's sink the ship along with those bastards." The orcs also cheered and shouted, "One coin at a time, it will be ours." They continued to say, "Whether it's women or beer, it's all ours." This drew the attention of the Knight Valvas. The orcs danced joyfully in celebration, even though they hadn't achieved anything yet. In the palace, a meeting was taking place. Eren said, "I am sure that's what they are thinking." 11 people sat around the table, where there was a map. Eren held up a shiny coin, looked at it, and said, "So the ship carrying that pile of gold." He looked down at the map, pointed to the position of the ship, and continued, "We'll be escorted by Admiral Moraine's fleet." Eren placed the pirate ships behind, then explained, "When the pirates aim for the pile of gold, the Admiral will run away. Luce's ships, commanded by us, will ambush until we reach the cliff." Eren placed the ship down on the map and continued calculating. "Behind us will be the snowstorm crew. John Myers has betrayed us." He continued, "We will execute a pincer attack from 3 different directions." After hearing this strategy, some people eagerly agreed, while others were somewhat concerned. Eren continued, "The Pendragon fleet has 20 ships and I am in command. The Moraine fleet has 60 ships and Moraine is in command. The Myers fleet has 20 ships and Myers is in command. And the Tolio fleet has 60 ships and Tolio is in command." Eren clenched his fist and said firmly, "With this formation, we can definitely defeat them." At port, Eren burst into tears and ran out calling, "Brother." She rushed to hug Eren tightly and said, "No matter what happens, you must come back safely." Eren shyly patted his little sister's head and smiled lightly. Don't worry, haven't I always returned safely? Looking up, he saw Lindsay also shedding tears. He let go of Eren, pushed her towards Lindsay, and instructed, Take care of my sister in this territory, Lindsay. Lindsay lowered her head, closed her eyes, and held her hands tightly. She looked up and said, Yes, I will pray for your victory, Lord Eren. Eren looked at Lindsay with gentle eyes, stepped forward, hugged her, and said, I'm off now. He looked up and called Sol, who was sitting on the roof. Sol, please protect everyone. Sol nodded in agreement. In the night of big waves under the moon, the ship left the dock. Elkin and the master stood at the highest point of the mast, looking magnificent from above. The sound of lively footsteps echoed. A man with black hair turned his head and shouted, Let's go. The crowd joyfully cheered. With our strength and the protection of the White Dragon, we will definitely win and return. Carter raised his hand happily and shouted, I, Carter, will surely take the head of that bastard who sells orcs. The four of them charged forward with great spirit. Elkin looked down and saw Leon and his master fighting below. Leon threw a strong punch and his master deflected it. Leon gritted his teeth and swung a powerful punch at his master, but the punch slid off. His master sat down, smirking with satisfaction. Leon gathered momentum and jumped high, diving down towards his master. He clung to the ropes, moving from one to another, surprising his master with his agility. Leon landed on a plank, grinning with excitement, then suddenly jumped down to kick his master, shouting, Catch this. But with just one hand, his master managed to block the kick. Leon felt a bit disappointed, but his master praised him. You have mastered the art of fighting on the ship, Leon. Leon clenched his fists, joyfully exclaiming, Awesome. But then he scratched his head awkwardly and said, But master, I still haven't hit anything. His master replied nonchalantly, Of course, I wouldn't expect otherwise. He lowered his eyes, his voice helpless, and every time you attack, you yell like that. Attacking in blind spot is useless. Leon scratched his head in confusion. His master turned back to clean up the mess, saying, In combat, unnecessary actions only lead to death. He turned his head back and continued. Now, if you hadn't yelled, you might have actually hit us. Hearing this, Leon's eyes widened in surprise. His master tossed Leon a pair of gloves and said, Here. Leon unexpectedly caught them, examined them closely, and asked, These are your gloves, master. The master smiled and replied, The holy power of Turamis, the dragon of the Justice Army. He advised, Tomorrow will be your first match as someone who has learned my martial arts. Don't embarrass me in the Lord. Leon looked down at the item the master had given him, took off his gloves, and threw them to the ground. Then he put on the new gloves and declared, Understood. Above, Elkin and the master witnessed the entire scene. Before long, the ship arrived at the island. The Pendragon convoy entered. Tolio saw it and said, This will be our first fight, kid. Tolio turned around, looking at a person in a mask and black cloak. On the roof, Sol stood observing the sea, her face slightly pensive. She called, Ray. The waves were raging, two ships facing each other, one side being Tolio and the other Eren. It seemed the battle was about to begin. A large ship swiftly glided over the stormy sea. Then several more ships appeared. On the ship, a joyful orc jumped up and laughed loudly. Ha ha ha. Look at them running away. The bald pirate next to him also shouted. The navy is not only weak but also cowardly. On the admiral's ship, the crew members were hoisting the sails high. The admiral wore a sinister smile and scoff. Cuckoo, you fools. Once we pass the rock outcropping, his voice boomed strongly thanks to the sea breeze. You scoundrels will be attacked from all three directions. He looked ahead, baring his teeth in a grin. One sweep to catch them all. A young crew member with a worried expression approached and respectfully asked, Sir, can we really trust those pirates? John Myers will surely not betray us, will he? The admiral was surprised by the question, but the young crew member continued, Governor Pendragon said he would offer double the money that Tolio gave them. The admiral frowned and thought that. The young crew member continued to speculate, what if Myers and Tolio renegotiate? He could be likely to sell us out if he gets greater benefits from Tolio. The image of Tolio with countless treasures flashed in his mind. The admiral silently looked at the young sailor. He confidently exclaimed, Those who only focus on their own benefits are nothing but opportunists. And as someone who has fought against many of them on these waters, I understand their schemes better than you do, Admiral. He shouted, Can we trust them, Admiral? Hearing a crew member's question, the Admiral was extremely angry, gritting his teeth and about to respond when other crew members suddenly shouted, Sir, they. Before they could finish their sentence, a massive ship belonging to Tolio appeared before them with a giant flag displaying provocative images. On the flag, there was an image of a dagger plunging into the face of a king, accompanied by the words, The old and useless emperor has outlived his era. Upon seeing this, the admiral and his close young sailor were filled with rage. On the sail, Tolio squatted, wearing a provocatively wide grin that revealed a canine tooth as long as a tiger's. The admiral could only exclaim, "What the hell?" Another crew member in panic stammered, "Shit!" shouted loudly towards the man stabbed in the eye. "Father!" He screamed in pain. "I will not forgive you, wretched pirates," and rushed forward, forcing the loyal crew member to run and stop him. Another crew member used a telescope to look in that direction, shouting, "Sir," this person continued, "there are several others on Meyer's ship. In front of them are 4 people, tied up and hanging." The admiral couldn't believe it, shouting, "What?" The loyal crew member was patting the shoulder of the other crew member in comfort, saying, "I told you, we can't trust the pirates. We need a signal to start the battle quickly." The one with the telescope continued, "Their number of ships is greater than ours, however." The loyal crew member with sharp eyes remarked, "If we take down Myers, we will have a draw." The admiral was terrified, staring wide-eyed, unsure of what to say. The voice of the loyal crew member rang out again, "And if we deal with them before they get there, we can join forces with the Pendragon fleet waiting at the cliff." You confidently declared, "We will have the advantage." Hearing that, the admiral was even more furious, unable to speak. The other crew members also pounded their chests, confidently saying, "The quality of our soldiers far exceeds theirs. We are soldiers chosen from the Empire. There is no way we can lose to those pirates." They shouted in unison, "Admiral, fire the flares." The admiral, filled with anger, clenched his teeth, his whole body shaking. On the other side, Tolio smiled sinisterly. "How resilient you are, Admiral." After saying this, he snapped his fingers. At that moment, Elkin appeared in the sky on a bird in front of Tolio's ship. A sharp arrow was drawn, and after a few motions, the flag fluttering in the wind was cut into 3 pieces. The bound captives were also freed as he cut their ropes. The crew members on the admiral's ship witnessed this scene, and everyone was taken aback. Tolio laughed loudly. "Bah ha ha ha. Truly a masterpiece, Valvas." He stuck out his tongue mockingly. "Parrots like us can do whatever we want with them, while you can't even fight back." He contemptuously continued, "It seems the Imperial Navy has seen better days." This made the Navy crew members furious. Tolio added, "But it's not that we can't empathize with you." The close crew member's face darkened upon hearing this. He said slowly, "After all," the admiral bowed his head, trying to contain his rage. Tolio mockingly raised his voice. "Taking care of an elderly emperor must be quite a hassle, right?" The admiral was so angry that he clenched his fist, squeezing it so tightly it burst. Everyone on the ship had red eyes. The admiral ordered, "Fire." He wore 2 words, flares. Flares were shot into the sky, creating smoke that drifted towards the rocks where Eren's warships were anchored. Eren looked up at the sky in astonishment. The others on the ship were also panicked. Jody shouted in confusion, "Huh? What?" Elkin also looked up at the sky in fear. Carta shouted, "Are they starting to fire?" Mark Killian disagreed, responding loudly, "No way. This isn't part of the plan." Eren continued to stare up at the sky. Suddenly, he was startled, his face a mask of panic. Then Eren quickly shouted an order, "All ships, full speed ahead, engage in battle." The ship swiftly glided forward at the sound of the command, hastening to join forces with the Imperial fleet as soon as possible. Eren frowned, silently thinking, "Moraine." The ships continued to advance, while Eren inwardly shouted, "What the hell are you doing?" The admiral, gripping his sword tightly, said, "Just as I thought, you bastards are truly the embodiment of evil." His gaze darkened. "The charge of dishonoring our great emperor." He yelled, "You will pay with your life." The admiral called out a command. All ships set sail towards the Tolio pirates. Immediately after the shout, the fleet surged forward. On the other side, Tolio jumped down from his ship, saying, "See, I told you so." He covered his eyes with his hand and laughed loudly. They really are so stupid. The admiral's fleet was now right before them, with crew members armed and ready to attack. Tolio also readied his sword, prepared to face the battle. Shortly after, he jumped and soared over to the other ship. 2 crew members with crossbows shouted loudly, "He's coming!" Tolio swung his sword, creating a bright red flame. He continued to swing a few more blows, engulfing the entire cabin in a sea of fire. The crew members were screaming in panic. Tolio stood in a commanding position, holding his sword high. "The great Tolio has come to personally kill you all." His face appeared in the flames like a living demon, and he scornfully said, "You insignificant insects." The ship was floating on the sea, and everyone was in utter shock. "What? Have they already started the battle?" Mr. Markillian shook his head in denial. "No way." But that denial seemed only to reassure himself. Feeling anxious, Eren quickly ordered, "All ships, move forward at maximum speed. Gather with the Imperial fleet as fast as possible." After hearing the command, the ships immediately accelerated forward without hesitation. The seawater rushed aside, creating a sense of urgency. But it was too late. Right in front of them was Tolio's pirate fleet. What is this? One of Eren's ships had been blocked by Tolio. Smoke and flames erupted around his sword. Tolio laughed arrogantly. My noble body has come here to destroy you all, you little shrimps. Ha 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 ha. He laughed savagely and rushed towards the soldiers. A simple strike sent 2 or 3 of them flying, and the flames emitted from his sword further elevated his spirit and arrogance. The soldiers tried to encourage each other not to falter and to resolve to push Tolio back. 2 soldiers charged forward, but the shield of his made it impossible for them to predict the direction of the sword's attack. They decided to attack from both sides, but the result was that they were defeated by the lightning energy emitted from the shield. The remaining soldiers behind felt a bit confused and hesitantly asked, "Does that shield emit lightning?" Tolio stepped on the corpses of the 2 defeated men, casually responding with a bloodthirsty gaze. "What do you think? What will happen when my sword and Thunder Heaven combine with my unparalleled swordsmanship?" His chilling smile sent shivers through the remaining soldiers involuntarily. As soon as he finished speaking, the pirates surged forward. "Ha ha ha! Just as we thought. Charge, everyone. Kill them all." Among the pirates were the green-skinned demons, and just by looking at their bloodlust and the meager number of soldiers on the ship, it was clear what the tragic fate of this vessel would be. Meanwhile, the Admiral's ship was constantly reporting sinking vessels. Ships 3 and 4 have sunk, and now Ship 9 is also going down. Looking at the chaotic and devastated scene before him, the Admiral and his guard were in utter panic. What kind of power is this? I can't believe Tolio Oranges could be so strong. The Admiral worried that if this situation continued, his side would be annihilated before he could reunite with Pendragon's forces. Suddenly, a soldier ran up, shouting loudly, "Sir, even if I die, I will hold them back, a proud family of the Empire, and to avenge my father." Before he could finish, he was shot dead. Looking up, the Admiral saw the knight Valvas. With terrifying speed, she shot straight into his ear. Suddenly, she charged straight towards the Admiral and the guard beside him. Witnessing his man being killed right before his eyes, the Admiral was extremely furious, gripping his sword tightly, ready for action. He shouted the words, "Damn it," and waited for the knight to charge. Whiz! A sharp stroke of the sword, the wings of the flying creature fell. Its heartbreaking cries echoed until it hit the sea. Seeing his companion fall, Valvas widened his eyes in anger and said, "It's over. You are finished. By cutting off the wings of a valuable companion of a knight Valvas, you will pay for your crime with death." Turning to face the Admiral, the knight pointed his sword at the 2 of them, preparing to strike. Unable to endure the sight of the Admiral being threatened and his previous hatred for Griffith, the guard responded to the knight with a furious expression. "You filthy Griffith bandits, you have killed so many people. How dare you speak like that?" Before he could finish, he and the Admiral charged into battle. "Don't mess with me." Both of them simultaneously attacked the knight, but she proved to be incredibly difficult to deal with. The guard felt as if he were not fighting her, but striking against some lifeless, hard object. The Admiral also realized that he could easily block every attack from the 2. It turned out that this was the power of a Valvas knight. Oh, suddenly, with just a moment of carelessness, the knight broke the guard's sword stance. What is happening? Both were astonished, but to their surprise, he only cast a glance, his eyes cold as a grim reaper, come to claim a life. "Admiral!" The guard's scream echoed when he saw the Admiral take a blow from the knight. But not long after, in just a blink of an eye, the guard was thrown to the ground. Ah! The impact was so strong it left him dizzy. Just as he intended to pick up his sword, he realized his sword had been subdued by the knight. In that moment, the 2 looked at each other, but it was the gaze of a dying prey towards a hunter. For a swordsman, when the sword is taken away, it is no different from throwing one's life to someone else. "Stop, stop! Don't do this!" The scream was almost pleading, but the knight's blade still swung coldly, giving no one a chance to survive. Ah! Witnessing that scene, the Admiral was filled with despair, his face pained like a father who has lost a child. The atmosphere became heavy as if shrouded in a dark night. Despite seeing the Admiral's suffering, the knight only looked at him with eyes devoid of warmth, not a hint of wavering. Gathering all the suffering before him, the Admiral stood up, leaning forward and pointing his sword at him. "You bastard!" The knight replied, "Truly useless. A swordsman who cannot fight is worth nothing." As she spoke, she advanced toward the Admiral, adding, "So, just die." The tip of his sword was still stained with warm blood, as if craving more blood from the person in front of him. At that moment, when everything seemed to hang by a thread, Eren suddenly appeared, blocking his strike for the Admiral. Eren's sword forced the knight to take several large steps back. Beneath the billowing sails, 2 individuals, one male and one female, stood facing each other, their enemies. "Governor!" A call from Eren made the Admiral feel a surge of safety, urgently calling for Pendragon. Eren glanced around the scene, some laying motionless in pools of blood, having lost all warmth, while others were gravely injured, collapsing backward. Rage surged within him, and Eren felt his strength being unleashed. He roared, "You son of a bitch!" Immediately, that surge of power closed in, attacking the person in front of him. At first, the knight maintained his composure, but within seconds, he felt a strong threat emanating from Eren. "Just as I thought, you're not simple at all," he smirked, while also focusing his strength to confront Eren. Right after that, the two charged at each other, starting a fierce sword fight. The sound of metal clashing echoed as the three swords collided, creating a deafening noise. But to them, this sound was no different than the whisper of the wind in their ears. Eren relentlessly closed in and unleashed powerful sword strikes towards his opponent, the strength of a swordsman fully unleashed. Under the pressure of those attacks, the knight had to continuously retreat considerably. Seeing the intense sword fight, the admiral suddenly realized, despite attacking fiercely, the knight Valvis was still evenly matched with Pendragon. He continued to parry and created distance. Thinking of this, the admiral's eyes widened as if he understood something. Wait a minute, could it be that Pendragon was guiding Knight Valvis away from him? Was he doing this to protect himself? Looking at the figure shielding him, the admiral could not help but feel moved. The battle continued unabated. The two had been fighting for a while, and it was clear that both were full of fighting spirit, as if they had found a worthy opponent. The delight was evident on the knight's face. "You have exceeded my expectations," but before finishing his sentence, he lifted his knee and thrust it into Eren. This strike surprised Eren, but immediately after he lifted his knee to brace against the blow, both of them had to step back. With an expression of confidence and a hint of challenge, the knight said, "You think you can defeat a Valvis knight in swordsmanship?" While responding, Eren turned around and jumped into the air, holding his sword firmly. "You are not wrong," but his sentence halted there as Eren kicked the knight in the face and continued in his thoughts. "I have practiced this sword technique with Isla thousands of times." Unexpectedly, Eren's kick caused the knight to freeze for a moment, and then he suddenly realized that he was being thrown into the air by Eren. At that moment, Eren's sword was almost touching the knight's neck. Fortunately, the knight reacted in time, so his life was spared, but the previously flawless face was now cut and bleeding. Immediately, the knight regained his composure and firmly grasped his sword. Though he was still able to hold the sword, it was clear who would be the victor. With reluctance, the knight denied it to himself. "It can't be. How could you learn our swordsmanship?" His eyes widened in disbelief at what was happening before him. "You know, we also have a quite skilled Valvis knight on our side." Reflecting back for a moment, the knight remembered Elkin Isla. Standing up straight and facing Eren, the knight continued, "The defeat of Knight King Elkin Median Valencia." This statement left Eren extremely surprised. Just a moment later, a flock of birds flew in with knights on their backs. The admiral yelled loudly, "Knight Valvis." Standing on the ship's deck, the knight said, "That's all for now." Before the situation could stabilize, a sea monster suddenly appeared in the distance, heading towards the ship, where the two of them stood at an incredibly fast speed. In less than half a heartbeat, 8 leaped up, opening its mouth wide as if to swallow both of them. A sea monster. The appearance of this creature caught Eren off guard. Pendragon. This call startled both Eren and the admiral. It turned out that the sea monster was the pet of John Myers. Behind the creature was John Myers' lifeboat. "Jump on." His urging brought both of them back to their senses. "John Myers." The admiral shouted, his face still in shock. A moment later, Eren picked up the admiral and jumped onto John Myers' boat. The knight saw the two of them running and immediately chased after them. At that moment, Eren was holding the admiral with one hand and wielding a sword with the other, while another sword was held tightly in his mouth. If the knight caught up to them, they would certainly be in a disadvantageous situation. Fortunately, John Myers used his crossbow to shoot at the knight. Although it didn't injure him, it bought Eren and the admiral enough time to safely jump onto the boat. As soon as they set foot on the ship, John Myers turned around, faced the pirate fleet, and ordered, "Fall back quickly." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned back to steer the sea monster forward. Standing on the small ship, looking at the wreckage and flickering flames, Eren seemed to have a sense that something was about to happen.